Hello and welcome to Lexitecture, a podcast about word origins and histories. My name is Ryan, and in each episode my friend Amy and I present a new word to each other and you, delving into its past, uncovering its secrets, and discovering that even the most basic, unassuming word can offer up precious truth nuggets of wordy trivia gold. If that sounds like the show for you, it probably is, so tell your friends and come along for the ride. Today's episode, Subtle Sequin.
Anyway,
Yes.
we probably better talk about some words, eh?
We might as well talk about some words. It's lost to the mist of time whose quote-unquote turn it is to go first, but would you like to take it away, or do you want me to kick it off?
I can absolutely take it away.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. It has just occurred to me that I'm sitting in the dark, and I will need to read a book in a minute, but I'm not sitting in the absolute pitch dark. I'm sitting in the twilight.
Okay.
Perhaps. Not entirely roaming in the gloaming because I'm sitting down. But
Nice.
there is gloaming nonetheless. So, the word that I've chosen to talk about today is a very simple, sparkly little sequin. And I was a bit stuck about what to talk about. I'd kind of run out of my sort of natural, hey, that word's interesting, I'll look it up and make a little list of it.
Yeah.
Kind of process, if you want to call it that. It seems a very grand word for something that's not very grand.
Yeah.
And so I started to do a little bit of digging, and I discovered, I decided that I wanted to look for words that weren't Germanic or Proto-Indo-European root based.
Okay, that's fair.
So I googled words in English of Arabic etymology.
Nice.
Picked on Arabic for no particular reason. And one of the words that I found there was sequin. And immediately this word stuck out for me for one very, very simple reason.
Okay.
It's one of my major pet peeves.
Oh, really?
Of the linguistic world. And I don't know if this particular, you might call it an eggcorn, I suppose. I don't know if it's a Scottish thing or even a British thing or if it happens all over the English-speaking world.
Okay.
But I remember becoming aware at some point in my life, like as a child, that these little sparkly things on clothes and other paraphernalia were called sequins.
Right.
And because I read a lot as a kid, I tend to think of words in terms of picturing them written down in my head.
Yeah.
And that's good because it means that I'm pretty good at spelling, generally speaking, because I look at a word, I compare it to the way that it looks in my head, and if the two match up, then it's probably spelled correctly.
Yeah.
That's kind of how that process works, I suppose. And I also became aware that there were other people sort of in my consciousness who seemed to think that the little shiny silver things were called sequences.
Oh, okay.
Oh. As in, a pattern with regular jumps between it, or a mathematical sequence, whatever. And so they were mistaking the word sequence for the word sequins. And of course, sequins is a plural.
Yeah.
But if you imagine that these little things are called a sequence, then the plural would be sequences.
That's interesting.
So, so I recall the first time I heard someone talking about the sequence and thinking, oh, do they mean sequins? And they're just saying it a little bit strangely, or do they think that... And then this was compounded when they talked about sequences. And I thought, no, what is this? And then, maybe about, I don't know, sometime between the last 5 or 10 years, because that's about as exact as my time scale gets with memories.
Yeah, well, that's fair.
A shop popped up in an area of Dundee that sold fabric and dressmaking supplies and sparkly things. Uh-oh. And it was called Sequence. Sequence.
Oh.
And once again, I quailed a little. So when I found that the word sequin was on my sort of criteria list of words that weren't of Proto-Indo-European etymology, I thought, oh, let's have a wee look at this. Little sparkly discs. So in the OED, a sequin is defined as a small shiny disc sewn as one of many onto clothing for decoration.
Right.
The second definition that's given in the OED is a Venetian gold coin. The derivatives given in the OED, sequined either with 2 N's or 1. And the OED talks about, the etymology is fairly straightforward, I suppose. It did indeed start off as an Arabic word, but in order to unwind the etymology, what you have to look at is that second definition. So the Arabic word sika, which is transliterated into English as Sikka.
Okay.
And a sika was a die for making or minting coins. And this then gave rise to the word in Italian zecca, which was to mint.
Okay.
And that became zecchino or zekin. And eventually this led us to sequin.
Sequin. Huh.
So Etym says it's the name of a former Italian and Turkish gold coin. From French, sequin, from Italian, zecchino, a name of a Venetian coin, from zecca, a mint, from Arabic, sika, a minting die. And that's originally recorded in the 1610s. I'm not sure if that means that the coins were in usage then, or if that strictly comes from a written citation, OED style. However, the meaning of an ornamental disc or a spangle, which is a great word by itself,
Spangle
is first recorded in 1882. And quite simply, sequins are called sequins because they look like little gold coins.
That's fantastic.
And sewing little gold coins on your clothing would be pretty interesting and decorative.
Absolutely.
And I presume the spangles just got smaller until eventually the coins were kind of out of use and the spangles endured, as spangles tend to do. So the coins themselves, there's a citation in the OED stating that the coins were worn as ornaments. So from there, it's easy to see how the adornment of other spangly, round, shiny things would come from that. So you have, for example, a description of so it's from 1817, Walpole memoirs relating to European and Asiatic Turkey. Each tress was pleated, one half of it being adorned with Venetian sequins, the other half with a string of pearls. That's some fancy hair.
It is, wow. Jeez.
And again, velvet bags, one full of pearls, another of rubies, another of Venetian sequins. That's from 1870.
Jeez.
And it continues to be used to describe coins. 1928, his share of the spoils amounted to 500 sequins, about $1,000. 1984, with reference to, Venice, ducats, sequins, soldi, different coinage that was used there. And yeah.
Interesting.
Now,
I like that.
Yeah, I've just totally contradicted myself because I said 1857 for the first reference to them being used as clothing ornamentation, and OED has 1852.
Oh, okay.
Oh, it does say it may refer to coins used as ornaments in this way, as in the reference above. But in 1857, we have a gown of white satin covered with chiffon, embroidered with sequins of turquoise blue. So that's definitely not referring to a decorative coin, but a round, spangly thing used by itself to make things sparkle. Yeah, so sequin.
That's very neat. I like that. The thing that leapt out to me initially, in addition to the fact that I like the idea of people just strapping gold coins to themselves to glitter and make noise and generally draw attention to themselves, is I wonder about the connection between sika, the old Arabic word, and shekel, the Israeli coin, and whether they just happen to have phonetic similarities or if they are actually related in some way, or that's a question for another time. But I do...
That is a very interesting question. In fact, Google says no.
Okay.
So the straightforward definition seems to say that shekel comes from a Hebrew word sakal, S-A-Q-A-L, meaning to weigh.
Oh, okay. Well, there we go.
As in a unit of weight. I
There we
wonder,
go.
perhaps the coin weighed the same as a shekel of whatever, or perhaps was just of equivalent value.
Yeah. There we go. Questions asked and answered. I love living in the future.
I know, it's great, isn't it?
It's pretty fantastic.
Imagine people just have to keep information in their head all the times.
Yeah, it's nonsense. I just keep mine in my pocket.
Exactly.
Very cool.
And so, all our memories are broken.
That's right. Nothing works anymore for anything. My word is sort of the opposite of sequin, in that sequins are designed to draw attention and be ornate and ornamental. My word this time around is subtle. And so subtle is one of those words where, as I actually thought about it, I thought, the more I do this kind of research, the more impressed I am at actual lexicographers and the people who write dictionaries, because to come up with a definition for a word is actually very difficult.
Yes.
Especially, and it gets harder the more common the word is. To come up with, what does this word mean? And when you have kids, or as we were, when we were teaching ESL or otherwise, in the role of teaching, you have to come up with these different ways of describing something without using the word itself. But it's not always easy. And even if it's a word like subtle, like we say subtle in conversation, it's common word, but it's sort of when you actually stop to think about it, how would I actually describe this? So I actually like, even just dictionary.com coming up with their definitions is like, yeah, well done. So props to the dictionary. Also, side note, anyone who is on Twitter who is listening to this, who is not following all of the dictionaries they can, is missing out. Because somehow in the last 5 years, dictionary Twitter became amazing. And everyone running social media accounts, everyone with the keys to like Webster's and dictionary.com and all these other ones, their Twitter accounts is their game is always in the A class. They're doing really well.
Well, I mean, it's oft documented how much we love All Hail Susie Dent.
Well, yeah, of course. She comes up later in this one too.
Yeah, so
dictionary.com.
So if her pals are also on Twitter, I'm up for that.
Well, exactly. That's right.
Any friend of Susie's is a friend of mine.
Yeah, that should be on all of everyone's t-shirts. Dictionary.com defines subtle as thin, tenuous, or rarefied, as a fluid or odor, delicate or faint or mysterious, fine or delicate in meaning or intent, difficult to perceive or understand. And that all kinds of gets around this sort of nebulous way we use the word subtle now. It's on its face fairly straightforward construction. So it's got the sub, the sub, so Latin under, and then the tle that comes from tela, so tela, or a very similar Latin construction that basically means a web or a weave. And originally, subtle was a weaving term, and the Anglo-Norman is sort of where it first comes into the English sort of family tree as sotel, S-O-T-E-L. And in fact, many of the early forms didn't have that B in them. The silent B was not anywhere to be seen. And
I have to say, any time I see the words written down, I go through a very almost instantaneous process of going subtly subtle.
Exactly. And it's
every single time subtly subtle.
Yeah. And it's funny because on I believe the most recent episode of The Illusionist with the great Helen Zaltzman, the great Susie Dent was her guest, about which I'm interminably jealous. It was very exciting. And they got talking about this actual exact phenomenon of where this silent B comes from. And you see it in things like debt and doubt,
Yes.
where there's no reason to have a B there. And it turns out, as Miss Dent was explaining, it's just pretentiousness. It's at some point before spellings kind of got calcified the way they have, scribes were going, well, these come from Latin. And the Latin, so like in doubt, where you get dubitus, dubious, that type of thing, they just decided to put the B in so they would look more learned and have a greater connection to the Latin roots. Purely arbitrary.
That's entirely wonderful.
Yeah, just pedantry is basically all it is. So the reason you have to deal with a silent B in a bunch of words is because of pedants. So thanks very much.
And I have to point out, purely because it gives me an example, it gives me an opportunity to talk about the Grelling-Nelson paradox once again. I feel that subtle is most definitely an autological word.
Yes. Yeah.
So
definitely.
For those of you who do not hang on our every single word, we talked about we've been talking about autological words basically since the podcast started, but for a long time we didn't know that's what they were called. So Wikipedia defines autological as a word that expresses a property that it also possesses. So the word short is short, noun is a noun, pentasyllabic has 5 syllables, word is a word. And I feel that subtle is autological. The word is hard to define and means rarefied, hard to define, difficult.
That's fantastic. Yeah.
I don't know. Is that a true autology? Maybe not.
Someone will tell us, I'm sure. I hope.
Well, I certainly hope so.
I think it
like to learn things.
I think it probably is. But yeah, so that's kind of the nuts and bolts construction of the word, is those two factors. The history of the word goes through a couple of different sort of waves and transitions. In the early to mid 12th centuries, where it starts showing up in English from that Anglo-Norman branch. It meant originally in that time a thing skillfully made or designed.
Oh, beautiful.
It could also be something slender or thin, or it could be a person who was very perceptive, discerning, shrewd. So it's the kind of thing where I have to continuously remind myself when I see these things where, like, the OED earliest attestations are never, or almost never, the actual invention of the word. It's just the first written
it's pretty
example
rare for
of
that
it.
to happen. Yeah,
but I feel like, and there are people out there who will absolutely be able to clarify this for me or correct me or reaffirm my hypothesis here. I feel like a good way of getting at just how established in the spoken language a word was at the time it started being written down is how many different uses it already had. If that makes sense. Okay. Like the fact that by the 1100s, the same word could mean a very nicely designed bit of weaponry, or just a thin piece of cloth or a thin substance, or a person with a very keen mind and just a very perceptive person was a subtle person. Like, those things they're related, but they're not the same.
Yeah.
And for it to have all those things in its possession before it even gets written down regularly seems to say that this was a
bouncing about in the ether, isn't it?
Yeah, it must have been. I think it must have been a fairly common, maybe not common, but at least well-used word before it started being written down regularly. In the late 12th century, it starts being taking on that immaterial form. So those things, the one thing those things all have in common is that they are concrete objects or people. There's a tangibleness to it. By the end of the 12th century, we're talking about immaterial things, something difficult to understand or complicated. And this strand, interestingly enough, over the next sort of few hundred years, by 1580, it's a negative connotation, like an actively negative thing. Basically, it's something that's needlessly complicated, or, and I love this word, abstruse, is something that's subtle, something that's just, you're just being difficult. You're being just needlessly complicated. Abstruse.
And see, abstruse strikes me as another autological word.
Also an autological word.
damn difficult to wrap your mouth around those particular letters. Abstruse. Yeah. It feels like you've too many teeth in your mouth.
It's needlessly complicated.
Yeah.
Mid 14th century, so like around 1340, it's talking about behavior or words or actions that are meant to deceive or delude. So there's a tricksy element to it, characterized by slyness or treachery, is the way the OED sums it up. So a subtle speech is one that you have to be careful of. It's sort of your used car salesman lingo.
Oh, this is wonderful. It's almost like a little potted history of distrust.
Yeah. The other thing in the
At what point did people start to be suspicious of people who were learned?
Yeah, the anti-academics of their day. But by the end of the 14th century, you get things like subtle wares, so SITIL in this particular case, and subtle wares, or subtle goods, in the same vein as like your white goods. Subtle goods were goods sold in powdered form or finely ground.
Oh.
So those big, you see the in the Arabic markets, you see the pictures of these massive piles of spices. Those would be subtle wares because they're sold in a very fine form, finely ground form or powdered form. And it's not until sort of 1768 is the first OED example of basically the modern use. Not making a strong impression on the senses, elusive, faint, delicate, unemphasized, all that stuff where you get to that nebulous sense of what it is now, where it can be a subtle distinction is one that's hard to really pin down, or something like that. A subtle smell or a subtle color is one it's there, but how there is it really? All that stuff.
Yeah.
So by 1768 you kind of get to the more modern terms of it. Going way back now, we've gotten where we are. We might as well drive right back into history. Back to pie. So you stayed away from pie. I'm diving right into it.
Yeah, you see, I stayed away from pie, but I don't know why, because I love pie.
It's fantastic. So the root of the tella portion of subtle, where we get the tl in subtl, is it was originally TKS is how they have it transliterated, and it's a term encompassing the action of weaving, but also fabricating more generally.
Nice.
And that tex is where we get architect. Textile, yep, for the weaving.
Oh.
Architect, nice. Through the Greek tekton, which is builder or carpenter. And so from there you get things like technological, technology, polytechnic, all those things that use that tech root. Those all come from this text, which is related to the tella in Latin, tekton in Greek, tella in Latin. And it went that way. And it's also where we get pretext, which is something that surprised me, because then I thought, then subtle is just a different way of writing subtext. But subtext actually comes from a whole different text root word, which just means is actually written. So a subtext is the same text that we get, text meaning the written word. Whereas
but that's pretext, not in any way related to textile.
But it's not related to textile.
But pretext is.
But pretext is related to textile, because the idea of a pretext is that you are weaving something in front of to disguise something.
Oh, that's so beautiful.
So like weaving a veil in front of your actual plans. Your pretext is the veil in front of it that people see, and what's behind it is what you're trying to keep hidden, which actually still maintains that idea of subtle. Like if you lay the pretext on the ground and put something under it rather than behind it, it becomes subtle, but it does not become subtext.
That's absolutely wonderful.
So yeah. So there's there's subtle from finely ground, needlessly complicated, interwoven, and also arrogant pedants putting bees in where they shouldn't be.
Well, that's brilliant.
Yeah. So there's subtle. So subtle sequin.
I feel I need a minute to take all that in, which is often the case with subtlety.
That's it for another episode of Lexitecture. If you like what you've heard, please spread the words. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook by searching Lexitecture, Lexitecture, and find us on our website at lexitecture.com. We also love hearing from you, so if you've got a word you'd like us to look into, a tasty bit of trivia to share, or anything else you'd like to tell us, drop us a line at words@lexitecture.com. Talk to you next time. Bye.